So we're going to take a look here at Chapter 12 in GDP. Gross domestic product is all final goods and services produced in a nation in a year. Aggregate demand, which is all of the demand of the entire economy, helps represent GDP. It is all the spending in our economy. Now, aggregate demand can be broken up into 4 different sectors. It is the sectors that make up our economy. They are the consumers, which are the households, the government, businesses, and foreign sector. If you add up the spending of each one of these 4 sectors together, you would get the entire spending of the economy, the spending on goods and services. You can also look at this and say that this spending is going on in today's dollars. Whatever it is for today's dollars is considered to be nominal. So nominal GDP, today's dollars, or spending for our goods and services, represents the demand for our economy as a whole. Now, real GDP plus the anticipated inflation will help us determine what nominal GDP is, but we'll take a look at that in a second. There are other ways to calculate how much spending is going on in our economy. We can take the price level of all the goods and services out there and multiply it times the quantity output of all the goods and services, and that will tell us the spending on all the goods and services. A last way that we could calculate this is by taking the money supply, how much money is out there, and multiplying it times the velocity, how often those dollars are actually spent. This will tell us how much spending is going on in our economy. Please note that I sub G, this gross investment, is business spending on capital. We've noted before that capital has the ability to move supply. I sub G, or capital spending, is one of the few components that has the ability to move both demand and supply. In regards to the foreign sector, exports are positives and therefore underlined in green, minus, this is not a dash, it's a minus, imports, which are a negative. Imports are negative because it is money leaving our economy. Exports are positive because that's foreign dollars flowing into our economy. When adding up GDP, you make sure that you subtract out the imports and you add the exports. We stated that gross domestic product are all the final goods and services produced in a nation a year. But these are final goods that are ready to be sold. Once they become inventory for a business, it counts when it becomes the inventory, not when it's sold. There are items that are produced in an economy and actions that occur in an economy that do not go in towards our GDP. Examples of this are intermediate goods. Intermediate goods do not count because they are not considered to be final products. They are not ready to be sold, and they're not counted in order to avoid the idea of double counting. Examples of an intermediate good would be the following. If you were taking a Snickers bar, and the Snickers bar was a final good, and it hit the inventory shelf, and it cost $1, that Snickers bar that cost $1 would be added to GDP. However, the 10 cents worth of peanuts that went into the Snickers bar would not count. So when the Planters Corporation sells peanuts to the Snickers Corporation, that transaction does not count because the price of the peanuts, those 10 cents, is already included in the final price of the Snickers bar, $1. If we included the peanuts as well as the entire Snickers bar, then we would be counting the peanuts twice. Used items do not count for the same reason, to avoid the double counting. They were already counted once when they became inventory the first time. So things in the thrift store or the yard sale do not count. Now, the wages of the employees at the thrift store will count. It is the work or the service provided, but the item itself does not count. The underground economy doesn't count either because the government doesn't know about it. The underground economy can be anything from you mowing your neighbor's lawn, babysitting, or other nefarious activities. Household production isn't included for the same reason because the government does not know about it. You might provide the service of cooking for everybody in your family or cleaning the house. Those are services, but you're not actually paying yourself. So the government doesn't know about this and it's not included in GDP. Lastly, transfer payments are not included in GDP because no good or service is actually created. It's simply just money exchanging hands. Examples of a transfer payment would be things like stocks. You can buy stocks, pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars for stock in Amazon or Tesla or whatever it is. You're exchanging hundreds or thousands of dollars for stock, and you're getting a sheet of paper. It's just money exchanging hands back and forth. No good or service is actually created. Another example could be if you were to receive $5 for your birthday from grandma. You're receiving this money exchanges hands, but no good or service is created. Other examples that we might see from the government are things like unemployment compensation or ideas such as welfare payments or government subsidies to businesses. These are all examples of money exchanging hands, but no good or service being actually created. Now, services do count. The stockbroker that sold you the transfer payment stock, their commissions will count. If the stockbroker sold you a stock that was valued at $100 but charged you $102, that $2 commission fee would count towards GDP because that's their service charge. If someone were to sell you a used car, the income that they received on top of the used car's value would be their commission. For example, if they sold you a used car valued at $10,000, but they sold you the used car for $10,500, that $500 would be their commission and would count. Rent is also an example of a service that is used for that year, even if the building itself is from many years ago. The rent for that year is a service and it counts towards that year's GDP. Nominal is equal to real plus anticipated. Inflation, we know, is nothing more than an increase in prices over time. Nominal is essentially today's prices in today's dollars. So, for example, the nominal price of a can of Coke today might be closer to that of $1. The nominal price of a can of Coke in 1950 would be closer to that of 10 cents. The Coke itself has not changed. However, the price for the Coca-Cola has changed. We can see here that nominal GDP is equal to aggregate demand. It's the spending in the economy. In today's dollars, the prices for our goods and services. If we were to take the Q, the quantity of how many goods and services we're making, and multiply it by the price level for those goods and services, we would then get the spending for our economy for those goods and services in that year's dollars. That is our nominal GDP, and it's also known as our aggregate demand. Nominal GDP is equal to that year's output times that year's prices. Real GDP, on the other hand, has been adjusted for changes in prices, the changes in inflation over time. Real GDP is that year's output times what is known as the base year prices. Here is an example. If an economy makes two different items, soda and candy. In 2019, they produced 50 pounds of soda and 100 pounds of candy. In 2020, they produced 50 pounds of candy and only 50 pounds of soda and 50 pounds of candy. In 2019, the soda cost $2 a pound. In 2020, the soda cost $3 a pound. In 2019, the candy cost $5 a pound, and then in 2020, the prices of candy skyrocketed all the way up to $10 a pound. Let's take a look at what the nominal GDPs are in comparison to the real. So in 2019, the nominal GDP, which is the nominal amount, what they actually produced, times the cost of it, gives you your nominal amount. So in 2019, the economy produced $100 worth of soda and $500 worth of candy to get you a total amount of $600 in GDP. The nominal price or nominal GDP in 2020, we take a look at it and say, oh, well, they produced 50 pounds, but now it's $3 a pound. So they produced $150 worth of soda, and now they produced $500 worth of candy, making a nominal GDP, that year's amount, to $650. But wait a second. When you have it in nominal dollars, it makes it look like in 2020 they produced more than they did in 2019. But in reality, we notice that in 2020 they actually produced less than what they did in 2019. Why does it look like they made more? Because we have not adjusted for the increases in prices to 2020. In order to calculate the real GDP for 2020, you take that year's output and multiply it times the base year's prices. You take away the inflated prices. So you would take 50 times 2 to get you $100 worth of soda in 2020, and then 50 times 5 to get you $250 worth of candy. That together gets you a real GDP amount of $350. So you can now compare 2020 to 2019 and see that in 2019 much more was produced than in 2020. The GDP deflator is nothing more than showing a change in prices between those nominal GDPs and the real GDP. GDP deflator is equal to your nominal GDP divided by your real GDP. The Consumer Price Index is used to help calculate and track changes in prices over time, like inflation. The Consumer Price Index looks at the average prices of goods and services, or a market basket of 300 goods and services from the average consumer. There are shortcomings to the CPI. This Consumer Price Index does not account for advances in technology or quality of products over time. For example, cars that were produced in the 1970s might have cost $20,000, and you take a $20,000 car today. Well, in the 1970s, those cars might not have had air conditioning. They might not have had airbags, crumple zones, proper safety glass, backup cameras. There's lots of advances in technology that go into these vehicles, and the CPI does not account for that. So please take that in consideration. In order to track the rate of inflation, the formula is used as the difference between the two items over the original. If in year one the CPI was equal to 200, and in year two the CPI equaled 207, the difference of 7 divided by the original of 200 would get you a rate of inflation of 3.5%. You can do the same for an individual item. If you had, say, a watermelon that cost $10 one year and it cost $12 the next year, then you could say the difference was $2 divided by the original of $10 to get you an increase of 20% in the price for that fruit. We'll also take a look at changes in the nominal wages of workers to help determine what real wages can be. If workers' wages were to increase by 3%, but at the same time inflation increased by 4%, that means workers, yay, you're making more money, but at the same time, everything costs even more. In reality, you're going to see that your real wages drop by 1%. Remember, the nominal wages of workers, nominal equals your real plus your anticipated inflation. You're going to see that if the workers' wages were to increase by that 3 equals something, and you're going to see that the inflation here is equal to 4 plus 4. The only thing that could work is if this was negative 1. Inflation has the ability to impact borrowers and savers also. If you borrow money from a bank at an interest rate of 5%, because you and the bank both anticipate inflation to be at 5%. But actually, inflation is greater than that. There was unanticipated inflation, and if this is the case, benefit when there is unexpected inflation. I'm sorry, guys. Let's stop this.